Well, hello, church family. We're now looking at Proverbs 6 today. Proverbs 6, there's a variety, again, of different exhortations in this chapter dealing with different themes, even about what even the Lord hates. But what I wanted to focus on today is on Proverbs 6, verses, I think, 6 to 11. And it's really the first teaching in Proverbs, if I'm not mistaken, that will run as a theme throughout Proverbs on addressing and warning against being a sluggard. Sometimes sloth is used there in the book of Proverbs. If you do a word study there throughout the Proverbs, which, Lord willing, we will be doing as a church family in one of the Proverbs sermons on work ethics, you'll see sluggard and sloth used somewhat interchangeably to describe the same proverbial folly that we are to, refrain from, put to death, and obviously do the opposite. And I want you to pay attention how Solomon here in Proverbs 6, verse 6, as he addresses a topic of laziness, something that I think how would you even define lazy, right? Laziness. What is the word picture you get in your mind of a lazy person? Well, you kind of have the picture of someone who's extremely overweight, eating a bunch of food, sitting on a couch, being a couch potato. Or maybe somebody who's just supposedly at work and on the clock, but instead of working hard, they are, what we say, hardly working. It's the image of that kind of person who just kind of seems to squander and waste time doing frivolous things, or sometimes doing absolutely nothing with their life. I even remember a story about, 12 or 13 years ago that I remember with Julie. I had a bunch of guys over at our apartment, and we were probably in our second year of marriage, no kids yet. And I had a bunch of guys that I was about to take out to do some street evangelism. And it was always an eclectic group of guys, but there was this one guy named Thomas. He was an interesting cat. He was a young professing believer, but I remember he came over one time, and just to kind of ice break the meeting or whatever, I started asking the guys, so what have you been up to today? And we got to Thomas, and as Julie was kind of walking into the room, Thomas, man, I just woke up, man. And it was like 2 p.m. And, keep in mind, Julie worked 4 10s at that time. She would get up at like 4:30 or 5 in the morning. Her work ethic was anything but slothful. But when he said that, he kind of said in this kind of jokey, nonchalant, I'm almost kind of proud of my basically not doing anything until 2 o'clock today. And Julie just said, well, that was a waste of a day. And let's just say the Lord has helped Julie grow in encouragement. But I do think the admonition and rebuke was apt in that moment, because that's exactly what Solomon does here in Proverbs 6. So here in Proverbs 6, we see how Solomon, in addressing this common, subtle, and often not talked about sin in the Bible of laziness, and he says, look at the ant. Consider the ant, O sluggard, and be wise. Now think about that for a minute. If I'm going to teach someone about hard work ethics, wise work ethics, diligent work ethics, dependable work ethics, I could probably think of a lot of different illustrations to use. A type A person, someone who works 2 jobs, someone who has 2, 3, 4, 5 kids at home, homeschooling, managing the household, active member in a church, someone who works 50, 60 hours a week. I mean, I could come up with a lot of different analogies, but he says, look at the ant. In other words, look at this tiny, insignificant, often stepped on animal of an ant. Ants can't talk to you. I don't think I've ever met someone who said, hey, I'm going to go spend $100 on just ants or something like that. Maybe you have an ant farm. But anyway, more or less, the bottom line is he points out this small, insignificant animal that we sometimes would overlook and never think 2 seconds about, except killing. And he says, consider her ways and be wise. And so you'll see kind of the next refrain there is, without having a supervisor, a boss, a manager, a ruler, a chief. In other words, someone looking over her shoulder, telling her what to do every step of the way because she forgets all the time or that sort of thing. She doesn't need that. She doesn't need someone looking over her shoulder. The ant doesn't need someone to quote unquote crack the whip. The ant doesn't need someone to constantly be telling them what to do next. This ant finds work to do and gets to work. This ant knows, number one, its need. It needs to eat. So lazy people have a misunderstanding of what needs are. You know, I need more rest. I need more sleep. I need more vacation. I need more breaks from the ministry. I need more breaks from people. And though rest is good, sleep is good, vacation can be good, taking breaks or a sabbatical can be good. But as you notice in the proverb, the sluggard has a preoccupation with escaping into nothingness, just lying there, doing nothing productive, to the point that the proverb says, the warning in verse 11, why are you lying there, O sluggard? In other words, they've well surpassed the time for rest, the time for a break, the time for relaxation. They've made rest an idol. They've made inactivity their God. And that's why Paul in the New Testament says, if any man is not willing to work, and I don't say work necessarily just a paycheck, but someone to be productively active with whatever talents, opportunities, and gifts and strengths they have, he shall not eat. 2 Thessalonians 3:10, I believe it is. So when you look at the proverb, how is an ant wise? Number one, the ant does not need someone to constantly be babying, telling them what to do, looking over their shoulder, cracking the whip, having to have extra accountability by their boss because they are always looking for work to do and they're getting to work. Second thing is you notice that she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food at harvest. The bottom line there is, guys, the ant knows what it needs. It needs food to eat and knows the preciousness of time, knows that getting that food is going to take time. There's going to have to be a logistical course of action, maybe work alongside other ants, avoid certain places, know where to find the food. In other words, it takes some forethought. It takes prudence. It takes planning. It takes kind of weighing out the balance. There's going to be some days it rains. Some days it snows. Some days it's crazy hot. Some days there's a lot of traffic. You've got to think through that ant without having a GPS, without having an Excel spreadsheet, without having an Alexa or some kind of, smartphone device tell him what the day beholds. He's constantly having to factor this ant is constantly having to consider time, logistics based off the need. And of course, the preparing for food takes time. Gathering the food takes time. In other words, the wise person, the proverb says, has a good handle on the preciousness of time, which is really what I want to just kind of pause there with is this. Laziness is less about being type A. It's less about loving work. And it's more about two things. Number one, stewardship from God. And number two, the preciousness of time. And I make that argument from Matthew chapter 25 in the parable of the talents. I'd encourage you to read that today as a kind of a New Testament complement to this. When Jesus is giving this parable about the kingdom of heaven, he says there's this master gave talents to 3 different servants. One servant got 5 talents, the other 2, the other 1. The first 2, the ones with the 5 and 2, doubled if you will, their talents. They invested, they used that stewardship well, and they did so in such a way that it doubled the master's profits. And in light of that, it gave these servants a reward, both the master's good pleasure and joy, and even a greater reward in stewardship as a result of it. In other words, their hard work paid off. Their faithful stewardship, as he says, well done, my good and faithful servant. No, it's interesting. The third servant, I don't know if you've ever paid attention to this, he does nothing with the talent. He does absolutely nothing. He just wastes the opportunity. The master comes back, and guess what happens? He basically says, I'm going to give you an account. What did you do with what I gave you? And it says, because I knew you to be a hard man. Luke 19 on the parable of the 10 minas says, I knew you to be a severe man. In other words, the reason why the servant did not wisely steward what the master gave is because he had a wrong view of his master, which affected his actions and attitude towards his stewardship. And what's interesting is, as the master hears this excuse, which is again what is often laden in a lazy person's heart, in all of our hearts at times, we just make excuses. He makes his excuse, he tells him why he did it, and then the master says this. He says, you wicked and slothful servant. Guys, think about that for a minute. Jesus uses this parable to teach about those who inherit the kingdom and those who are faithful stewards that will stand before the master on the last day. The root cause of laziness is unbelief. You don't believe God's good, you don't believe time is precious, and you honestly just don't believe that you're going to have to give a stewardship or an account of your stewardship before God. And friends, I have been convicted of laziness in my life a ton. I remember as a young man, I'll probably share this in a sermon soon, where I was probably 21, 22, and I was complaining about work, and it was a summer job. It was pretty hard, but it wasn't terrible. It wasn't digging ditches. And I remember there was a guy we had on staff, on our cleaning staff, and he was a pretty rough dude. He was rough around the edges on a whole different, for a lot of different reasons. And I remember he one time came into the office, shut the door. He said, I need to talk to you. And he just laid it into me. He was about a year older than me, and he knew I was, quote unquote, the boss's son. That's actually, I don't know why I said quote unquote, because it's true. But he just said, you're lazy. Your work ethics stink. And your dad works really hard, and you've had handouts most of your life, and you don't even understand how good you've got it. And because you're a professing Christian and because you're so open with your faith, I just think you need to hear this. And this guy, I don't even know if he was a Christian. He at least professed it at the time. But that was a hard rebuke. And the thing is, he was right. He was right. It was one of those pivotal moments in my life. So that's one of the things you'll notice about the sluggard or the sloth in the Proverbs. Not only do not have an accurate understanding of the preciousness of time, the stewardship, it was like a snake. The stewardship we are going to give an account for before God. But the other part of it is we're over-dependent on the hard work and kindness and goodness of others. In other words, it's not being healthy in that dependence, but over-dependent. We want handouts. We want people to do it for us. We want people to read the Bible for us, teach the Bible for us. We want people to, X, Y, and Z around the house. And again, it doesn't mean you can't hire someone to cut your grass. It doesn't mean you can't hire someone to do the work more efficiently so you can focus on other tasks. Those are all going to be conversations I'm going to use in a sermon coming up in a few weeks. But the bottom line is I want us to think about what areas of our life are we neglecting, making excuses, waiting for someone else to do it for us, waiting to be told constantly something we already know we need to be doing in our life. Are people excited to have us work alongside them, work under them? Are people eager and they just think am I on the top 5 list of people that we can be dependent upon? Because we're going to get the job done. We're going to get the work done. As you think through Proverbs 6, the idea of wise work ethics, it's really the seed form is faith. Do we believe the Lord Jesus Christ is good? Do we believe that his sacrifice is not only good for our forgiveness of sins, but frees us to serve a good master with whatever talents we've been entrusted with? So friends, this has been a longer video, but it is a topic I'm fairly passionate about because I've seen God do a tremendous transformation in my own life. Being a workaholic is not commendable. You can make work a god and neglect other necessary stewardships in your life. And that is not what the that proverb is speaking or addressing. But Proverbs 6 is addressing those of us who have areas of our lives where we've made rest, inactivity, doing nothing, being overly dependent, and idle. And it's costing us. It's actually bringing difficulties in our life and for those around us. And that's why he says in verse 11, poverty will come upon you like an armed robber. In other words, before you know it, time will be up. Others will not depend on us. They will not look to us. Actually, responsibilities and opportunities for maybe job promotions or being moved up in leadership roles in the church, or even being given new privileges from our family, whether it's parents or siblings or whoever, those will be taken from us. And that's why the sluggard and the slothful person, the root cause of all this is really unbelief. We don't understand that we have a stewardship before the Lord Jesus, and we will all give an account. And so, friends, the antidote to it is look to the ant as a rebuke and as an example, and look to Jesus Christ. He said, night is coming when no man will work. Scriptures are very, very clear that we can't promise or guarantee tomorrow. And we are to redeem the time, Ephesians 5:16. Use time like you would spend it with money. And pray that God would give us all wisdom and to show us areas of our life where we are struggling, where we are procrastinating, where we are making excuses, where we are neglecting, whether that's bodily health, giving our employer our best, serving our church with zeal, or just simply loving the person that God has put in our life the most in a given week by seeking to meet needs in their life that God has called us to be a wonderful vessel of blessing and love. I hope this encourages you. I hope this challenges you. And I leave you with an illustration to show you how laziness, in a comical way, can catch up with all of us. This past morning, if you will, I was helping get Noah started with the day with doing some chores. And when we were done, I came inside and the boys wanted to wrestle. And I noticed when the couch cushions fell off, wow, you will learn a lot about what a family does, or your kids do, by what you find under the couch cushion. And I found all sorts of things. I found what my youngest has been eating, obviously for probably the last 3 weeks in a row, fish chips or fish crackers, Doritos, etc. But I also found a bunch of random stuff. I found a wristband. I found something that looked like a bouncy ball, but it didn't bounce. And I found like 3 pens. Well, that would be me. Well, guys, this is what this whole kind of soul searching on laziness is going to be like. What's under the couch cushion? I did vacuum it. It's all good now. You don't have to vacuum under your couch cushion to be necessarily a hardworking person. But the point there is, if the Lord begins to unlift or lift up the couch cushion in our lives, and the Lord surrounds us with people that loves us enough to say, hey, you're neglecting some key areas of your life that's actually a result of laziness, slothfulness, sluggardness. What are we going to do about it? I think we should look at it the way that we're looking at all the Proverbs. Teaching or correction that steps on our toes is meant to bring us healing and transformation for our good. I hope this is encouraging to you. It's a long video, but I pray the Lord uses it to help us continue to think well about the life He's given us, the stewardships He's given us, and that we will use the energy and the time and the abilities we've been given by the Lord Jesus to show off that He's a good master, not a hard master. He's a wonderful master to please. He's a wonderful master to serve, and that He will reward us exceedingly beyond anything someone could reward us in this life. God bless.